Why is Indian food spicy? The two authors of this book, Hidden Games, suggest that there is an underlying logic. There is a hidden rationale behind why Indian cuisine is spicy. In their view, it's not merely because spices grow and are local to the people of India. They suggest that it is the preservative effects of the spices, the fact that so many spices inhibit the growth of bacteria, which causes food to spoil. This is more important in hot and humid climates, which has led to people in India developing a taste for spicy food. So, for example, some spices, like allspice and oregano, and the root vegetables garlic and onion, inhibit the growth of all 30 types of bacteria. Many, like bay leaf, mint, coriander, and nutmeg, inhibit half to 3/4 of the bacteria. Some, like black pepper and the citric fruits lemon and lime, only inhibit a small number of bacteria on their own, but amplify the effects of the other spices. Then, Billing and Sherman compiled hundreds of recipes from dozens of cultures around the world and indexed the types of spices and the quantities used. Sure enough, as mean annual temperature increases, the proportion of recipes containing spices, number of spices per recipe, total number of spices used, and use of the most potent antibacterial spices all increase. They then ruled out one alternative theory after another. It is natural to ask whether spices are simply used in hotter places because that's where they grow, but as the existence of a bustling and ancient spice trade suggests, spices are used in many more places than they're grown. Allspice is a nice example. It is used in 10 times as many countries as it is grown. So this is just one example of many that the two authors discuss and attempt to explain. It's a pattern of behaviour, in this case dietary preferences, cuisine preferences. They also look at many other forms of human behaviour, habits, beliefs, practices, as well as natural phenomena, which at first seem irrational, crazy, bizarre, mad, but actually have an underlying logic, a hidden rationale to explain why they occur, their origins, why they became established in the first place, and why they have continued to operate in the world. So this is just one example, the case of Indian food and why it's so spicy. They also talk about how Fijian women, so women in Fiji, when pregnant, will not eat certain types of fish. Okay, so they will avoid rock cod, shark, barracuda, and moray eel. And they suggest in the book that one of the reasons for this is that fish in the upper ends of the food chain carry a dangerous toxin called chicotera. Too much chicotera can make us sick, causing pain in our hands and feet and very bad diarrhea. These symptoms can last for long months. Chicotera poisoning is especially dangerous during pregnancy and breastfeeding because women are more susceptible to the toxin during this period and because it can harm fetuses and breastfeeding infants. Chicotera is a chemical produced by algae. It accumulates in fish that eat the algae, accumulates in higher concentrations in the fish that eat those fish, and in even higher concentrations in the fish that eat those fish. So there's a chemical produced by algae that's eaten by smaller fish. medium-sized fish eat those fish, larger fish eat those fish. And so this chemical is increasing higher up in the food chain. And Fijian women will not eat those larger fish when pregnant. They weren't aware of the science involved. They actually developed some quite unusual beliefs. So they believed that if they were to eat those feet, the baby would develop rough skin or smelly joints. Okay, but once again, the authors are using this as an example of how there's an inner logic at work. Also talks about how in Mayan and Incan times, it was customary to soak corn in an alkaline solution prior to eating it. Traditionally, this was done by tossing some burnt seashells or a bit of wood ash into the water in which the corn is boiled and then soaked. Once so treated, the corn kernels, now called hominy, turn a pale yellow and have a soft gummy texture. They can be added to dishes whole or easily ground down into flour. Now, treating corn with alkaline solution is called nixtamalization, and although it might seem like an odd thing to do, actually is essential in releasing vitamin B3, also known as niacin, and this makes it digestible, makes the B3 digestible, and so it prevents deficiencies like pellagra, which can cause dementia, diarrhea, and dermatitis. Of course, nixtamalization is centuries old, much older than the discovery of vitamins. So again, we see that a culture has developed a useful practice without the aid of modern science. So this is another example of how, possibly even by accident, people discovered that adding these seashells or this wood ash actually makes them healthier. If you were to try to explain this from a mimetic point of view, you could simply say that people that did this through imitation simply didn't die, and so they had more children, they were more successful, and so by having more children, this practice became more prevalent, became more common. So although they didn't understand vitamins, this became more common because people that were healthier passed this particular practice by imitation on to successive generations. And so over a period of time, you can quite easily understand how many more people did this, even though they weren't aware of the science. So there are many other examples in the book of phenomena which seem strange, bizarre, but have good underlying reasons, which are kind of hidden from view. They talk about signalling in the book. So they suggest that the reason why people buy expensive cars is because they're expensive. Kind of classical economics view of human behaviour is that we're all completely rational and we're all looking to, get the best available product at the cheapest possible price. But this isn't possibly the case. The reason why they suggest people buy art, and they pay millions of dollars for artwork, which possibly isn't even technically brilliant. Many modern forms of art, for example, don't require a huge degree of skill. Develop a taste for fine wine. Because they're signalling that they possibly have money to waste, arguably. That's what they're suggesting in the book, is that because rich people can afford to kind of throw money away, they're signalling their status and their wealth and their ability to make money, their production capability, if you remember from Stephen Covey. That's what they're kind of signalling. By driving around in a Ferrari, there's many cars that could cost under £20,000. Good, solid, reliable cars will get you from A to B, but the wealthy prefer to buy much more expensive cars, even though they might be inferior in terms of, the sole purpose of going from A to B, because they're signalling that they can afford to waste money. White collar workers got their name because people that worked in offices, accountants, the business owners, they would not be doing the hard labour, the dirty jobs. They would not be on their hands and knees cleaning, working on the factory floor. And so they wore white shirts, possibly to portray the fact that they were of higher status, because those white shirts would stay white. And they wouldn't need to wash them as often, they wouldn't stain. So it became a kind of symbol of their position in life. So many things are of this nature. They talk about how millions of people fly to Paris to visit La Louvre. I think it's one of the most visited museums in the world, to take a look at a painting. I think it's the Mona Lisa painting that's in there. But they suggest that one can just go to Google Images and take a look at the picture, take a look at the actual painting. So why are people paying all of this money and going to the trouble and the effort to fly across the world to visit this museum in Paris? And they're suggesting once again it's a kind of signal that they can afford to take the time to do so. And so, then talks about, peacock tail. Peacocks have a beautiful, ostentatious tail, and the males who have a bigger tail, attract the females. And again, the tail is a signal that they're fit enough. It comes at a cost. It makes them slower and more vulnerable to predators. But if they're sufficiently fast, the cost of having a long tail is less. The cost of having a longer tail for the fitter males is less, because they can still avoid predators better than the males who are not as fast, not as strong, not as quick. The tail is going to, make them more vulnerable. So they talk about all of these different things around the world, and it's quite interesting. They jump around quite a lot and look at so many different areas. My only criticism of the book would be that I do think that they possibly could have planned the book so that it was more structured and more coherent. Started off really well. I remember reading the first 4 chapters, the first third of the book, thinking, this is amazing, and I didn't want to put it down. It was just so engaging. But I feel that the last half of the book ran out of steam a little bit. They start talking about how morals and systems of law evolve, talking about norm enforcement and incentives and what's required in terms of maintaining systems of law. And they look at different parts of the world. At the end of each chapter, they do include a kind of mathematic rationale behind their theory, behind their ideas, and it is quite rigorous. I have to say, I didn't take the time to read the mathematical parts at the end of the chapters. I kind of understood the main point of what they were talking about qualitatively. Didn't really need the supplementary mathematical models and diagrams to understand what they were getting at. So, for example, they dedicate quite a large chapter on a particular butterfly, which during the day lands on certain spots, sunspots, and there's a kind of unwritten rule that the butterfly that lands on the spot first is the one who owns that spot. And so that if another butterfly comes along, they will engage in a kind of dance, a kind of spiral. They won't actually fight. They're just kind of testing the waters. They're engaged in this dance to ascertain who was there first, because the one that was there first will not back down. And the other one will realise, okay, this is the rule at work. Because game theory, so they analyse this in terms of game theory, and what they're saying is that there's only a number of possibilities. Either they both fight for that spot, and doing so comes at huge risk. They could get injured, their wings could get damaged, and they both could come off the worse for wear. Unable to attract females, unable to fight again, unable to fly even, they'll quickly die, if they're unable to fly. So the cost to both of them of fighting is very high. The cost of them both giving way is high because they're losing out on a spot. That spot is going to attract females. So females will come along and they'll see, which ones occupy the spots, and that's how they'll mate. So there's an opportunity cost if they both, they're not going to be, completely giving way. So the optimal solution, the Nash equilibrium, in game theory it's called the Nash equilibrium, is for one to keep it and the other to give way and move on. There'll be other opportunities. This kind of solution can only work really if there are plenty of other opportunities. If, for example, this was the only sunspot in the forest, the cost-benefit analysis might produce a different outcome. It might be necessary for the two to fight over the spot, but because there's plenty of other opportunities, the butterflies who engaged in this strategy over time would have become more prevalent. So the butterflies that fought would have had less offspring over time because they would have been damaged, killed, and so didn't have any offspring. And the ones that just gave up the spots every time, not going to attract the female butterflies. And so there are certain Nash equilibriums that evolve and become more common over time. And so they put all of this under the microscope. This is another example of a natural phenomena which you can look at and think, what's going on there? But they're actually looking at the mathematics behind the curtain, beneath the surface of this form of behaviour. And there are so many other examples. So this will hopefully just give you a taste of what the book is about. Hopefully I've done it justice. As I say, it's a good book. If you're not familiar with game theory, it will be fine. There are some great videos on game theory. There's a fantastic one where I can't remember who actually gives it. It's the people that came up with the theory, because it's still a very young theory. I think it was developed in the 1970s, around that time, because of international relations between the USA and the Soviet Union, and they were looking at outcome strategies of the Cold War and how best to manage the situation and so on, and that's how game theory emerged. And it's quite an exciting body of mathematics, but the two authors, that's what they talk about, and they try to explain various phenomena. They call it games because it's a kind of hidden strategy at work. Interesting book. I'll leave it with you. Thanks for watching.